Allmark opens his eyes, finding himself lying in a bed. He sits up, questioning if he is in the infirmary. Examining his hand, Allmark notes the absence of burns and wonders how long he was out. He reflects on it being the first time he'd lost consciousness so defenselessly, deeming it a failure. Allmark recalls how the flames swelled as if with a will of their own, and his magical power was quickly sucked away. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he wonders what on earth that was. A sudden wave of dizziness hits Allmark as he covers his face. A figure holding a book advises Allmark that he better not walk yet. Teacher Ilmes explains that he has almost completely released the magical power in Allmark's body, and advises him to lie down a little longer. Allmark asks Teacher Ilmes what on earth that power was. Teacher Ilmes confirms Allmark attempted to use light magic, to which Allmark affirms, but the teacher states that what Allmark used was not light magic. Teacher Ilmes reveals that the power Allmark used was Dragon Flame, a destructive magic that burns enemies to ashes. Allmark is stunned, questioning if it was Dragon Flame, a destructive magic. Concerned, Allmark asks about the well-being of everyone else. Teacher Ilmes reassures him that no one was injured and the flames quickly burned out and stopped. Teacher Ilmes notes that Allmark's magic power has not been properly trained. The teacher asks why this happened. He questions if Allmark thought this couldn't happen to him. Allmark explains that he thought he had the image of light magic. He clarifies he had been imagining a small flame all along, questioning how it became a big flame, let alone dragon's flame. Allmark wonders how such destructive magic could suddenly happen, especially since Dragon Flame is a difficult magic to handle even for middle-grade students. Teacher Ilmes states that Dragon Flame is recommended for higher-grade students, not someone as inexperienced as Allmark. Teacher Ilmes elaborates that the spell is very draining and potentially fatal for users with low magic power. Allmark acknowledges he has done something truly dangerous, considering he cannot even meditate properly yet. Teacher Ilmes reiterates his earlier sentiment that Allmark is very clever, but explains that while Allmark tries to instantly understand, interpret, and apply what he sees and hears, this is not true understanding when it comes to magic. Allmark remembers the voice just before fainting. He recalls Teacher Ilmes saying, "I told you so," realizing he had interpreted magic in his own way and ended up being quite arrogant. Teacher Ilmes tells Allmark that Syria, their healing mage, will bring medicine soon, and he should drink it and rest before returning to the dorm. He instructs Allmark to rest in his room, focus on recovering magical power, and avoid meditation training for today and tomorrow. Allmark apologizes to his teacher for the trouble caused. Teacher Ilmes reminds Allmark that his earlier comment about not having much time to catch up does not mean he should rush. The teacher encourages Allmark, stating he has the power within him and can control it if he takes his time and proceeds carefully. As Teacher Ilmes leaves, he tells Allmark to rest well for now. Syria, the healing mage, enters with a large jar, wondering if Allmark is awake. She offers Allmark a cup of medicine, telling him to drink it all and take his time. Allmark sips the drink, noting that he feels his magical power accumulating drop by drop. Syria informs him that once the dizziness is gone and he can walk, he can return to the dorm, reiterating what Teacher Ilmes likely told him. Before leaving, Syria sternly reminds Allmark not to go out today or tomorrow and to rest properly in his room. Alone again, Allmark considers if he should return to his dorm soon. Allmark sits on the bed, realizing class seems to be over. He decides he needs to apologize during dinner. He remembers tomorrow is his first day off, and he had plans with Wendy to get books and explore the town. Allmark recalls his plans to go with Wendy to pick up books and have her show him around town. Realizing he cannot go, Allmark reaches for the door handle. Suddenly, Wendy, Musen, and Nelson burst into the room, startling Allmark. Wendy, flustered, explains that Ms. Syria said Allmark would be sent back to the dormitory and that she was very worried. Allmark checks Wendy's hands and expresses relief that there seemed to be no injuries. Allmark turns to his friends, apologizing for what happened. He specifically apologizes for not being able to control the flames and putting them in danger. Nelson cheerfully dismisses Allmark's apology, saying such things happen often and they also couldn't control their magic well at first. Nelson adds they almost got burned and even created fire pillars in the past, with Musen agreeing. Nelson recounts a time he accidentally burned Torque's hair, much to the amusement of Musen and the embarrassment of Lilte. Nelson adds that while Lilte seems quiet, she sometimes does unbelievable things, recalling how tough it was at that time. Norish points out that no one else had produced such a huge flame as Allmark did. Musen gives Allmark a thumbs up, declaring his flame the #1 firework in their grade. Allmark expresses surprise, having expected them to be angrier. Nelson explains that everyone makes mistakes and has caused trouble. Wendy, Norish, and Lilte chime in, saying it's gotten better now, but back when they were freshmen, things were different. Wendy takes Allmark's hand, telling him not to hold back. Wendy tells Allmark she heard his special training is still only meditation and offers her help anytime. Allmark smiles gratefully at his friends, thanking them. Allmark then apologizes to Wendy, explaining he won't be able to keep tomorrow's promise, much to her and Musen's surprise. Wendy and Musen express their disappointment, as they had various shops, including a delicious candy store, they wanted to take him to. Nelson tells Allmark not to worry and to take a break, offering to get the textbooks with Morgan later, which Allmark appreciates. The group bids Allmark goodbye, with Nelson reminding him they still have things to do. Allmark closes the door, glad to have met such great friends. As Layla walks away, she states she doesn't want to betray everyone's feelings. Allmark follows her, calling out Julia and apologizing for bothering her. Layla turns, saying she knows what he did, using powers he can't control. Layla disdainfully tells Allmark he is really just like a monkey. Layla states that today's class turned into a mess. She bluntly tells Allmark it is because of him. Layla apologizes tersely, claiming she doesn't have time. She requests that Allmark not disturb the class and walks away. The next day, a bird chirps outside the window. Allmark lies in bed, remarking on the nice weather. He is startled by a knock at the door. Wendy enters with a pile of books, explaining that since Allmark has to stay in his room, she thought she could help with his classwork. Allmark asks Wendy if she is sure, noting it is her precious day off, but Wendy insists it is fine as she can study too. Allmark accepts Wendy's offer, and she suggests they study in the library. Wendy, being an excellent student, was able to answer any question Allmark had effortlessly. Allmark found it hard to tell if Wendy was exceptionally skilled or if the questions were just too easy. Later, after lunch, they sit together. Allmark turns to Wendy, asking why she is always so kind to him and if it is just her being nice. Wendy explains that she initially thought Allmark, being new to the academy, would not understand anything. Allmark acknowledges this but still feels sorry, though Wendy insists it is okay because she is doing what she wants to. Wendy elaborates that on Allmark's first day, it was their fault that Torque set his eyes on him. She recalls Torque's aggression and explains that because of that incident, she and her friends discussed and decided something. Wendy reveals their decision was to protect Allmark as much as possible. Allmark is surprised, questioning their intention to protect him. Allmark recalls that without the ability to protect himself, he would have died crossing the Manhwa Strait, while Wendy thinks about protecting him. He muses that in the eyes of these children, he seemed like a person who needs protection. Allmark thanks Wendy. He tells Wendy that while he may seem unreliable, he does not need someone to protect him as he can protect himself. Wendy asks if he really means it, clarifying she did not intend to say he was unreliable. Allmark smiles, saying it is fine and that he really appreciates everything everyone has done for him, including what happened yesterday. Wendy says that is beside the point and she wants to ask something. Allmark asks Wendy why Torque always seems to pick on him. Wendy asks Allmark what he thinks of their class, pointing out the mix of kids with and without surnames. She elaborates that in their class there are 4 children with surnames, identifying them as aristocrats: Torque, Fia, Layla, and herself. The remaining 12, including Allmark, are commoners. Wendy explains that unlike classes 2 and 3, which have more kids with surnames, their class has very few. Allmark thought nobility and commoner status did not matter in this academy, but Wendy reveals that Torque seems unhappy about being in the commoner class. Wendy states that even the teachers in the academy never discriminate against any students, and she thinks she should do the same. She continues, explaining that some people believe aristocrats are superior to commoners, and that only children with surnames should be in the academy. Allmark questions if the difference is due to talent or pride, noting that it is true the 4 aristocrats are the top performers in their class, supporting the theory of noble superiority. Wendy explains that Torque, in particular, has always had a strong dislike for commoners, and both his attitude and words have been very forceful. She adds that because of Torque's treatment of commoners, which she hates, children without a surname often become intimidated. Wendy asks if it is strange. She conjures a small magical light, asserting that before the power of magic, social status means nothing at all. Allmark is surprised and intrigued, wondering why she is using magic. Allmark observes a symbolic scale, understanding that the power of magic is equal for everyone. Wendy clenches her fist. She admits that she has always wanted to change classes. Wendy confesses she has been thinking about it all the time, but in the end could not do anything. She leans in conspiratorially. Wendy asks Allmark if he remembers when he first entered the classroom, admitting she thought an amazing kid had just arrived. She recalls that when Allmark first came to the academy, even though he knew no one and could not use magic, he did not shrink back, instead looking around with a confident face and determined eyes. Wendy states that then their eyes met. Allmark smiles, saying he remembers it well and that her words make him happy. Wendy reflects that at that moment she had a certain thought. She thought that maybe Allmark could change the current situation. Wendy admits it was just her baseless assumption. Wendy explains that she wanted to help Allmark, even a little, and wanted him to fit into the class quickly, apologizing for saying weird things. She quickly adds that it might sound like she is just talking bad about Torque, and although it may not seem like it, there are good sides to him. Allmark thinks to himself that it is certainly a weird thing she is saying. Allmark states that, to begin with, he has absolutely no intention of changing his current class. He explains that just keeping up with the lessons is already a struggle. Allmark adds that he does not even have a trace of spare energy. Wendy looks down, seemingly dejected by his words. A faint light emanates from Allmark's chest, catching Wendy's attention. Allmark turns back, questioning what just happened. Allmark thinks of Wendy, recognizing that this child has taken care of so many troublesome things for him. He feels he owes her a debt of gratitude. Allmark resolves that he must repay this debt. A flashback shows a snowy scene with tents, and Allmark hears his name being called, a reminder of a past debt. Allmark remembers his father, Ray's, telling him that if he cannot repay the kindness he received, he should quit being a mercenary. His father had said that mercenaries value gratitude, and betrayal always leads to death. He recalls his father advising him that it is crucial to start off strong in battle, and not to let himself be underestimated by someone who makes a woman cry, but to show them he is stronger. Allmark asks Wendy if there is a martial arts class tomorrow, to which she confirms. He reflects on being the son of a northern mercenary. Wendy cheerfully reminds Allmark that tomorrow will be his first martial arts class. Allmark tells Wendy she can call him Allmark if she wants, but asks her not to call him Allmark-kun anymore. He explains that it reminds him of the past. Wendy is taken aback but agrees, though she feels she might have seen something she should not have. Wendy feels like she saw something she should not have. Allmark smiles and tells Wendy he will show his gratitude tomorrow. The scene transitions to a large arena. Wendy cries out for Allmark to stop. Allmark proposes a bet to Torque. If he loses, he will leave the academy, but if he wins, Torque must do what Allmark tells him. Torque, furious, declares he will show Allmark and that today will be the last time he sees Allmark's annoying face, while Allmark provokes him, asking if he is scared of losing. While Allmark is absorbed in reading, a voice calls his name. Musen urges Allmark that they should get going soon, and Allmark concurs. Allmark closes his current book and picks up another one. Standing before the martial arts arena, Allmark asks Musen if they should proceed. Musen excitedly explains to Allmark and Wendy that King Galai and many distinguished guests are attending the annual martial arts tournament. Nelson inquires if they will indeed be fighting in the presence of the king, to which Musen enthusiastically agrees. Wendy elaborates that winning is a significant honor and notes that only third graders are participating in the elementary division. Allmark processes this information, understanding that this is their inaugural participation. As Nelson asks about other similar tournaments, Torque angrily shouts at the group, telling the newbie to shut up. Another student allied with Torque instructs them to remain silent until Professor Bowen arrives, disdainfully calling them ill-mannered barbarians from the north, prompting an apology from one of them. Nelson whispers to Musen that Torque seems unusually tense today. Musen acknowledges Torque's pride in his martial arts skills, noting his definite strength but also a rough fighting style he would prefer not to face. Professor Bowen enters, introduces himself as the martial arts instructor, and identifies Allmark as a new student. Allmark respectfully greets Professor Bowen. Professor Bowen tells Allmark that he sees potential in him, but for now he will only observe the practice. Professor Bowen signals the start of a practice match between Layla Cowgan and Julia, who questions the effectiveness of the thin sword. Allmark watches, considering that while thin blades could exploit gaps in heavy armor, they appear excessively thin for robust combat. He further reflects that such delicate swords would likely break against axes or spears, rendering them impractical in actual battle. Allmark recalls that mercenaries in the north did not employ such slender swords. Allmark considers that this is not true combat but rather an aspect of education, as the war ended a century ago. He notes with some surprise that the students are nonetheless wearing armor for their sparring. Two male students are shown fiercely exchanging blows, much to one's surprise. After a match, one student, having lost again, challenges Wallace to a bout next, which Wallace accepts. Wallace is shown skillfully sparring, winning with apparent ease, not even seeming to exert his full effort. Musen observes that Wallace appears to be in a different league, just as Morgan had said, while the other combatants seem less skilled. Allmark then turns his attention to the girls' sparring matches. Layla and Wendy are locked in an intense sparring match, their thin swords clashing. Allmark observes Wendy and Layla, thinking their good movement might be due to early training as nobles. Allmark exclaims internally at how skilled they both are. After the match, Wendy compliments Layla on her consistently fast and accurate attacks, while Layla praises Wendy's formidable defense. Layla smiles, expressing her gladness that Wendy acknowledges her strength. Watching them, Allmark perceives that they appear to be having fun. Torque gestures towards a struggling Musen, telling Allmark that their class has no room for weaklings and calls him over. Allmark coolly replies that whether he is weak or not is not for Torque to determine. One of Torque's companions chimes in, suggesting Allmark has not learned from a previous mistake and finds his continued presence irritating. Torque asks Allmark if he has packed his belongings and when he intends to leave. Allmark firmly states he is not leaving, explaining it took him nearly 2 years to arrive and that he does not have much luggage anyway. Torque expresses his disgust at Allmark's ridiculous story, questioning if Allmark thinks it improves his image. Allmark asks what Torque means, insisting there is no reason for him to lie. Torque calls Allmark a ridiculous bastard and remarks that he is becoming cheeky. Allmark observes that Torque frequently uses that insult, then defends Northerners, acknowledging Southern magic's prowess but asserting that Northerners are not all barbarians. Torque counters by asking if it is not Northerners who have been engaged in internecine warfare for decades. He continues his tirade, claiming that the so-called mercenaries from the North are no better than common bandits. Torque smirks, believing his derogatory remarks about mercenaries have hit their mark with Allmark. Torque mockingly asks Allmark the barbarian if merely watching the sparring is enough to get his blood pumping. Torque then directly challenges Allmark, stating that he will be his opponent. Allmark calmly inquires if Torque sought permission from the teacher. Torque confidently affirms that he did ask the teacher. Torque then adds that Allmark is merely a spectator anyway, while Professor Bowen instructs other students to fight decisively. Allmark lets out a sigh, seemingly resigned to the confrontation. Holding a practice sword, Allmark states that since they are proceeding, he has a request regarding armor. Torque instructs his companion Galeen to lend Allmark his armor, to Galeen's surprise. Galeen looks on with a malicious smirk, clearly unenthusiastic about helping Allmark. Galeen reluctantly hands over his armor to Allmark, who thanks him. Allmark begins to strap on the borrowed armor. Now armored, Allmark faces Torque, apologizing for the wait, only for Torque to scoff and call him a bumpkin from the north. Torque vehemently declares that the academy is no place for barbarians like Allmark, urging him to return to his country and questioning his presence since he cannot use magic. Allmark calmly responds that he has been officially accepted into the school. Torque angrily retorts that he does not accept Allmark's enrollment. With a furious cry that he will never accept it, Torque lunges at Allmark with his sword. Allmark swiftly parries Torque's aggressive attack. Allmark skillfully deflects another of Torque's wild swings. Torque is visibly shocked and bewildered by Allmark's defensive capabilities. The onlookers, Musen, Nelson, and Wallace, express their confusion about the escalating situation between Torque and Allmark. Torque, furious at being thwarted, yells that Allmark is a bastard. Allmark thoughtfully questions Torque's claim to nobility. He then points out that Torque's vulgar choice of words does not seem very noble, leaving Torque momentarily stunned. Allmark internally considers how far he should provoke Torque, acknowledging he has been waiting for this moment, having anticipated Torque would confront him during martial arts class. He recalls his decision from the previous day to engage Torque in a fight, pretending to be forced into it. Allmark glances towards the teacher, identifying him as the primary obstacle or concern in his plan. Professor Bowen advises Torque not to consider himself special for merely avoiding one attack, implying the fight may continue, perhaps due to instructions from the academy director. Wendy expresses her worry, but Layla tells her not to be concerned, assuring her that she will repay a favor owed. Layla observes Allmark, noting his calm appearance but sensing an underlying boredom. Wallace watches Allmark, pondering his identity and sensing an aura of a high-ranking noble. Layla focuses on Allmark's eyes, finding them unsettling. She likens Allmark's eyes to those of a seasoned mercenary, as Allmark internally resolves to kill his opponent. Allmark provokes Torque by questioning if he is not, in fact, a barbarian from the north rather than a noble, and advises him against using scary threats. Torque, incensed, demands to know what Allmark said, while Allmark feigns innocence. Allmark then adds that, compared to his own capabilities, Torque is not particularly strong, further enraging him. Allmark internally assesses if he has provoked Torque sufficiently, concluding that this level of agitation seems adequate. Losing all composure, Torque screams that Allmark is a lowly peasant and attacks wildly. Allmark expertly blocks Torque's frenzied strike, recognizing his opportunity. Allmark's sword hovers near Torque's shoulder, demonstrating his control and Torque's vulnerability. Allmark targets Torque's face with precision. He then shifts his aim to Torque's throat. Torque grunts in frustration, unable to counter Allmark's movements. Allmark's blade also threatens Torque's chest. The spectators are amazed. Nelson questions Torque's ability, Wallace asserts Allmark's strength, and Musen notes Torque's inability to land a hit even when aiming for Allmark's face. Torque grits his teeth, thinking it is as if Allmark knows exactly how to evade every attack. Frustrated, Torque shouts that Allmark is a coward. He demands to know why Allmark keeps running away. Suddenly, Allmark's sword makes contact with Torque's chest armor. Torque's eyes widen in shock at the successful hit. Allmark calmly informs Torque that he has landed a blow. Musen joyfully exclaims that Allmark has won, while Torque reacts with disbelief. Torque shouts that Allmark's victory was merely a fluke. Layla remarks that Torque has no sense of honor, prompting Torque to tell her to shut up. Torque adamantly refuses to admit defeat. Professor Bowen observes that Torque appears to be still capable of fighting. Allmark calmly suggests they fight one more time, an offer Torque eagerly accepts. Torque is taken aback when Allmark states there are conditions to the rematch. Allmark proposes a bet. If he loses to Torque, he will leave the academy as Torque desired. Wendy reacts with shock as Allmark begins to state his condition for winning. Allmark states that if he wins, Torque must cease all discrimination against anyone in the academy, regardless of whether they are nobles or commoners. Wendy, distressed, tells Allmark not to provoke Torque further. Torque questions who would agree to such a bet, prompting Allmark to ask if Torque is scared. Allmark continues his taunt, asking if Torque is scared of losing to him. Torque, goaded, declares that the bet sounds interesting. He furiously accepts, vowing to show the barbarian Allmark and ensure this is the last time he sees Allmark's face. Allmark calmly announces that they will now begin the decisive match. Torque readies himself, a determined look on his face. Torque, consumed by rage, silently vows to kill Allmark. Their swords meet as Torque initiates his attack. Allmark observes Torque, thinking that his aggressive attitude contradicts his actual fighting style. Allmark takes a moment to glance at the students watching the duel. The onlookers, including Layla, Wendy, Musen, Wallace, and Nelson, watch intently as Musen notes Torque's hesitation and others offer encouragement. Torque's feet shift hesitantly on the ground, indicating his cautious approach. As Torque slowly advances, Allmark notes that it is already the second round of their duel. Torque, visibly tense, realizes that Allmark is showing no exploitable openings. Professor Bowen watches the unfolding match with a look of intrigue. Allmark subtly adjusts his footing, a barely perceptible movement. Torque looks puzzled, clearly unsettled by something in Allmark's demeanor. Torque wonders what is wrong, as he cannot detect any hostility from Allmark. Allmark, with unwavering focus, thinks to himself that there is nothing, perhaps no fear or no opening from Torque. Torque raises his sword high, preparing for a powerful downward strike. Before Torque can complete his attack, Allmark thrusts forward, his sword striking Torque squarely in the chest armor with significant force. Allmark completes his powerful thrust, sending a shockwave through the air. The students watching, Wendy, Musen, Nelson, Wallace, Layla, and Galeen, are all wide-eyed with shock and disbelief at the sudden turn of events. Torque is violently thrown backward by the impact, crying out as he hits the ground hard. Torque slides across the ground, his sword flying from his grasp, after being hit by Allmark's attack. Lying on the ground, dazed, Torque mutters in confusion, wondering what happened. Through his hazy vision, Torque sees Allmark walking towards him, and the realization dawns that he was hit. Allmark approaches the defeated Torque, who is struggling to rise. Standing over him, Allmark calmly tells Torque that he has won. Allmark then firmly instructs Torque to swear his oath now. Torque, looking up in defeat, hears Allmark specify that the oath must be made right here. The students watch the scene unfold, with Wallace reminding everyone that Torque must not discriminate against classmates, whether nobles or commoners. Wendy and Musen look on with anxious expressions. Allmark grabs Torque by the collar and Torque lets out a frustrated sound. Allmark stares intently at Torque, waiting for him to speak. Allmark tightens his grip on Torque's collar, applying pressure. Allmark shouts at Torque, commanding him to swear on his family name. He intensifies his demand, yelling for Torque to swear on the name of Seife that he will not discriminate against anyone. The group of students, including Wendy and Layla, watch the confrontation with mixed emotions. Musen, Wallace, and Nelson also observe the tense scene. Professor Bowen, after observing for a moment, turns his back on the scene. Allmark and Torque remain locked in their standoff, Allmark's discarded sword lying nearby as Torque pants heavily. Torque, struggling with his pride and defeat, grunts and grits his teeth. Defeated, Torque finally utters a reluctant, almost inaudible "I swear." Allmark looks down at Torque, ensuring his compliance. Satisfied, Allmark releases his hold on Torque's collar. Professor Bowen and Galeen hurry towards the fallen Torque, while the other students excitedly approach Allmark. Nelson and Musen are ecstatic, exclaiming how amazing Allmark was and how he sent Torque flying. Other students crowd around Allmark, asking if he practiced martial arts and questioning the source of his strength, while Layla simply says his name. Fia comments on Allmark's reckless actions as Wendy looks towards him. Allmark meets Wendy's gaze, telling her that he told her he would return the favor. Wendy turns to face Allmark, her expression filled with emotion. With tears in her eyes, Wendy genuinely thanks Allmark. Allmark looks slightly surprised by the depth of her emotional response. Allmark then smiles, understanding that her heartfelt thanks were precisely what he had aimed to hear. Wendy, wiping away her tears, asks Allmark if she managed to repay, even a little, the favor she felt she owed him, and he acknowledges the favor he received from her. Professor Bowen and Layla watch the group from a distance. Nelson and Musen enthusiastically approach Allmark, playfully requesting a fight with him too, as Wallace looks on amused. Fia observes the scene silently with a thoughtful expression. Allmark intensely demands Torque swear on his family name safe. Torque, visibly angered and pressured, hesitates to speak. With a grimace, Torque finally utters the oath. As Torque swears, an unseen person states that is enough, marking the beginning of Chapter 8, becoming a part of the class. Professor Bowen firmly instructs Torque and Allmark not to transform the class into a battlefield. He inquires if they are injured, to which Torque responds affirmatively while Allmark denies any injury. Holding a practice sword, Professor Bowen states that this incident provides a great opportunity to discuss martial arts. Professor Bowen elaborates to the students that while martial arts were vital during wartime, they are now primarily a component of education, a sentiment Layla Cowgan quietly acknowledges. Professor Bowen explains that martial arts are not a performance but a collection of techniques for quickly defeating an opponent, and having the resolve to win in training is acceptable. He tells Torque that determination is fundamental to martial arts. Torque looks thoughtful as Bowen affirms that his underlying ideas were correct. Recalling the intense confrontation, Bowen reminds Torque that battle and hatred are not synonymous, referencing Torque's earlier aggressive words. Professor Bowen clarifies that while martial arts demand total effort to defeat an opponent, mutual respect between combatants is essential. He stresses the importance of respect for the opponent in battle. Professor Bowen directly tells Torque that he lacks respect when fighting, which is central to studying martial arts in peaceful times. He warns Torque that without this respect, his understanding will remain superficial and urges him to reflect. Torque quietly affirms his understanding and Bowen acknowledges it. Professor Bowen then addresses Allmark, stating that he has achieved his win over Torque. Allmark, with Musen nearby, confirms this. Bowen adds that while he doesn't know the full story, Allmark was fighting someone much less skilled. Allmark internally acknowledges his use of traps and provocation against Torque. He admits to himself that these actions were to achieve his desired outcome. Professor Bowen sternly tells Allmark that it is unforgivable to trap and humiliate a classmate, deeming such actions despicable. Allmark accepts the criticism and agrees to reflect on his actions. However, Bowen acknowledges that Allmark's underlying goal was commendable and that motives drive actions, which surprises Allmark. Professor Bowen echoes Allmark's earlier stance, stating he will not tolerate discrimination within the academy, regardless of social standing. He concludes that while Allmark's methods were wrong, his objective was just, and therefore his transgression will be forgiven this time. Allmark expresses his gratitude to Professor Bowen. Professor Bowen tells Allmark that his greatest offense was using the martial arts class as a venue for his personal dispute. He declares that such conflicts should be handled outside his class, much to the surprise of Allmark and the other students. Consequently, Allmark is assigned the year-long task of cleaning the martial arts arena. Meanwhile, Wendy is shown diligently cleaning her sword with a smile. Musen also appears to be happily assisting with the cleaning tasks. As they work, Nelson jests with Allmark about his speed, while Layla playfully questions if Allmark isn't the one moving too quickly. Allmark carries a heavy box with his friends also pitching in, their playful banter echoing in the hall. Professor Bowen approaches, remarking to Allmark that if everyone helps, it hardly seems like a punishment. He then directs Allmark to report to the principal's office after school, causing Allmark and Musen to look surprised. Musen appears worried, but Allmark confirms he understands. Allmark arrives at the principal's office, remembering he last saw the principal on his day of admission and knocks before entering. Allmark steps into the principal's office. Principal Jorg, an elderly man with a long white beard, acknowledges Allmark's arrival. The principal inquires about Allmark's experience at the academy, and Allmark responds that it has been very pleasant. Pleased with the answer, Jorg mentions he has heard about various incidents and invites Allmark to recount them. Allmark appears slightly hesitant to begin. Principal Jorg explains that while he has received reports from teachers, he wishes to hear Allmark's personal account of what happened and his thoughts on the matter. Allmark explains various events to the principal, including his magic training, interactions with Wendy and Torque, and the recent martial arts class, sharing his thoughts throughout. Throughout Allmark's explanation, Principal Jorg nods from time to time. At certain points, the principal lets out a soft chuckle. Allmark observes that Principal Jorg listens to his entire account without interruption. Principal Jorg observes that Allmark appears to be doing well and is surprised by his use of Dragon's Flame, to which Allmark attributes the help of his teachers. Allmark clenches his fists, acknowledging the significant help he received from everyone, including Wendy and Musen, over the past 10 days, stating he couldn't have done it alone. Jorg tells Allmark that this feeling of gratitude is crucial and will help him understand magic. The principal underscores the value of both the time dedicated to learning magic and the time spent fostering friendships. Principal Jorg advises Allmark that these aspects are vital for his development as a magician and should not be overlooked. Jorg then shifts the topic, asking Allmark if his financial situation is stable, which momentarily surprises Allmark before he confirms it is. The academy provides essential items like robes for students. Students are also provided with daily meals. Furthermore, accommodation in dorm rooms is supplied free of charge. In addition to family allowances for some, the academy gives all students a small monthly stipend for daily necessities and extra expenses. Allmark realizes he hasn't needed to use any money yet, which Principal Jorg acknowledges. Principal Jorg mentions his obligation to Allmark's father and encourages Allmark to voice any needs he might have, concluding their discussion. As Allmark exits the principal's office, he finds Nelson, Musen, and Wendy waiting for him, who explain they followed him out of concern. They admit to seeing him enter the office by himself. His friends confess their anxiety grew as he remained inside for an extended period. Nelson voices their fear that Allmark might have faced severe punishment, possibly even expulsion. Allmark smiles, reassuring them that he received no punishment and was simply asked about his well-being since his enrollment 10 days prior. Nelson teases Musen for causing alarm, but Musen insists he only reported that Allmark was summoned to the principal's office. Allmark expresses his gratitude for their worry, touched by a level of selfless goodwill he finds rare, especially compared to the North. He muses that while such open concern is often viewed as foolishness in the North, he genuinely appreciates it. Allmark feels that, in his own way as someone from the North, he managed to reciprocate their kindness through his actions earlier that day. His friends, visibly relieved that the situation wasn't serious, suggest they all return. Allmark agrees, a sense of belonging washing over him as he feels he has truly become integrated into the class. Sometime later, Allmark is seen reading, lost in thought. He recalls Musen's happiness on their way back that day and his own hope that Torque would honor his promise. Nelson observes that Torque, despite seeming unfazed by the incident, still carries his usual arrogant attitude. However, Allmark notes that Torque, likely too prideful to break his word, has ceased calling Northerners barbarians or using insults like peasant. Allmark considers Wallace, who is generally kind to everyone but him and Fia. He also thinks about Layla Cowgan, believing she would remain distant regardless of his social standing. Allmark concludes that Torque's slightly subdued behavior hasn't fundamentally altered the classroom dynamic. Allmark exchanges morning greetings with Wendy just as Musen bursts into the classroom, apologizing for his tardiness. Musen lets out a dramatic sigh, prompting Allmark to note his unusual behavior. Musen urgently exclaims that something terrible has occurred, catching Allmark's attention. He breathlessly declares that he saw a shadow, to which Allmark questions, "A shadow?" Allmark teases Musen, suggesting that if it's a shadow, it has been with him all along, much to Wendy's confusion. Allmark then points to Musen's own shadow on the floor, causing Musen to cry out in mock terror while Allmark chuckles. Musen is shown comically cowering from his own shadow as Allmark continues to laugh. Musen begins his explanation, stating he overslept after breakfast that morning. Realizing he would be late, he hurried towards the school building, noticing no one else was around. Suddenly, he sensed movement in the shadow of a nearby tree, and it being spring, initially thought it might be a rabbit. Upon closer inspection between the trees, he found nothing, though the fleeting shape seemed too large for a rabbit. Then his eye caught the shadow flitting by once more. Deciding it was likely his imagination, he resumed running, and a final glance back revealed an empty clearing. Nelson questions Musen, asking if that was the extent of his story and if he actually saw anything concrete. Musen insists he did see a shadow momentarily, prompting Allmark to ask if it could have been a monster, to which Musen queries Allmark's curiosity. Wendy expresses some curiosity, and Allmark remarks that there are many monsters in the north. Nelson interjects, telling Allmark that monsters are scarce in their current region, especially within the academy grounds. Nelson adds that he has never encountered any trace of a monster since enrolling, leaving Musen to sigh. While Musen considers if he was mistaken and Nelson attributes it to Musen's timid nature, Allmark believes it is better to remain cautious. Musen, despite the earlier excitement, expresses relief at having arrived for class on time. Wendy turns to Allmark, noticing his pensive expression, and asks if he is worried. Allmark explains to Wendy that his upbringing in the north, where monsters are common, might have made him more sensitive to potential threats, which could appear odd to those from the south. Wendy kindly reassures Allmark that his sensitivity is not strange. She then expresses a desire to hear more of his stories from the north. Allmark listens thoughtfully to Wendy's request. Allmark considers his experiences, which are often harsh and violent. He tells Wendy he doesn't have any particularly special stories to share, offering an apology. Wendy, understanding, thanks him nonetheless. Just then, Fia enters the classroom, announcing that class is starting. Fia informs the class that the teacher is running late today. She declares it's self-study time, leading to cheers from the students, though she admonishes Nelson for being too loud. As another school day ends, Allmark reflects on how tiring it was, also noting the intense heat of the southern summer. He finds the heat challenging, but acknowledges the benefit of the extended daylight hours. His attention is caught by Lilte walking alone on a path leading into the forest, and he wonders about her solitary presence there at this time. Allmark recalls Torque's earlier comment about Lilte being easily frightened and unable to handle darkness or loud noises. He realizes that by now, most students should be gathered in the cafeteria for dinner. Considering that entering the forest after sunset requires permission, Allmark decides he needs to approach Lilte and inquire about her intentions. Allmark approaches Lilte, expressing concern about her being alone at night and asking where she is headed, startling her. Lilte, surprised, asks if Allmark intends to come with her, quickly adding that he doesn't need to. Allmark cheerfully offers to accompany her, reasoning that he'll likely miss dinner anyway. Lilte then questions why Allmark is by himself. Her eyes begin to fill with tears as she looks down. They pause at the entrance to the dark forest. Lilte explains that she has lost something important within the forest. She reveals the lost item is a handkerchief given to her by her parents, which surprises Allmark. Allmark immediately apologizes for his initial, somewhat dismissive reaction, as Lilte becomes flustered. Lilte acknowledges the handkerchief's importance and considers if the search must happen immediately, given the dangers of the forest at night. Allmark senses there is more to her distress than just a lost item and asks if she is scared, though Lilte denies it before apologizing. Allmark finds Lilte's soft voice difficult to understand, wishing Nourish were present to help, and asks her to repeat what she said. Lilte quietly admits that she cannot sleep, implying the lost handkerchief is the reason. Lilte blurts out that she absolutely cannot sleep without her handkerchief, leading Allmark to understand her earlier reluctance to explain. Allmark apologizes for unintentionally making light of her situation. He gently encourages Lilte to tell him more about it. Allmark assures her he will listen carefully as he begins to understand the depth of her story. He learns the handkerchief was a parting gift from her parents when she started at the academy, and feeling isolated without friends, she cried herself to sleep each night. Lilte explains that the handkerchief became her comfort, allowing her to sleep peacefully, but now she feels she cannot sleep without it. She pleads with Allmark not to laugh at her predicament. Allmark reassures her he isn't laughing, empathizing because everyone, including himself with his mother's keepsake, has something precious they wouldn't want to lose or delay searching for. Lilte thanks Allmark for his understanding and apologizes for suggesting they postpone the search. Allmark tells her not to worry about getting loud earlier. With renewed determination, Allmark declares they will undoubtedly find her lost handkerchief as they step deeper into the woods. Allmark accompanies Lilte into the dark forest holding a lamp. He asks her about the color of her lost handkerchief and she confirms it is white, all while Lilte practices her light magic. Allmark considers the lamp Lilte handed him. He momentarily wonders if he too will someday master magic like Lilte. However, he quickly refocuses, reminding himself that finding the handkerchief comes first. Lilte confirms they are in the right area, though Allmark notes its whiteness should make it stand out. She explains she must have dropped it when she pulled out her knife while gathering wild herbs. Lilte points out some Takamaki kuritsum grass she also picked near a tree with growing vines. The magical light and lamp react with surprise when Allmark suggests splitting up. Allmark agrees to search one area, but Lilte quickly stops him. Lilte pleads with him not to leave her alone, and Allmark apologizes. Allmark asks Lilte if she has checked a particular bush, and she confirms she has but might have missed something. He then asks her to look over an area he previously searched. Suddenly, Lilte lets out a cry, and Allmark is startled by a sudden movement. He quickly checks on Lilte, asking if she is okay, explaining it was just the sound of nuts falling. They observe the fallen nuts on the ground. Allmark explains that once you understand what scares you, it's often not so frightening, though one must stay alert. Allmark advises Lilte that panic can be the most dangerous thing, and it is especially important to keep one's eyes open when scared. Lilte acknowledges his point with determination in her eyes. He then asks if it is too scary for her to continue and what she wants to do. Lilte firmly states no, it is not too scary. Clutching a nut, she affirms she wants to go on for just a little more. Allmark agrees, promising to stick with her until the end. Suddenly, Lilte exclaims from the bushes that she has found it. Allmark, surprised, asks if she really did. Lilte joyfully shows him the handkerchief, though Allmark seems to notice something is off. She holds up the handkerchief, revealing it is more gray, almost black. Allmark remarks that it's no wonder it was hard to find, and glad they found it, suggests they head back. Lilte sincerely thanks Allmark, expressing her gratitude that he came with her. As they walk back, Allmark tells Lilte he is glad they found it and that she showed real courage. Lilte questions if it was courage, thinking he is exaggerating. She modestly replies that she only found it because he was there and that he just helped a little. Allmark counters that it was she who decided to search for it. Just then an eerie sound pierces the air, startling Allmark. Hearing more rustling in the dense forest, Allmark comments that is how it is today. Allmark urgently tells Lilte it is the time of the beasts and they must return quickly, a sound he despises. Lilte, confused, asks what he is talking about, explaining that this is common knowledge in the north. Allmark, from the south, admits he has never heard it in the southern forest or the central plains and finds her statement unsettling. Allmark grabs Lilte's hand, stating they are no longer in a place where people belong. Lilte expresses her fear to Allmark, who reassures her it is all right. He admits he is scared too, uncertain if he can protect Lilte, and urges they must leave the forest at once. After running, Allmark believes they should be safe from their current location. Allmark thanks Lilte for running so hard. Lilte, catching her breath, agrees to rest for a bit and then head back. Allmark hears someone approaching in the distance and cautiously calls out. Nelson calls out Allmark's name. Allmark identifies himself and Lilte. Nelson announces to the others that he has found Allmark and Lilte. Nourish rushes to Lilte and hugs her, expressing her relief and worry, and Lilte apologizes. Nelson explains that since Lilte hadn't returned, they were asked to help look for her, while Allmark admits he is usually in his room alone. Nelson asks Allmark where on earth they have been. Allmark, flustered, claims his tutoring session ran late. He went back for something he forgot, and then happened to meet Lilte by chance. Nelson calls Lilte diligent. Musen exclaims it is too scary and he would never go out at this hour, while Allmark tells him he made a good point, though it's not exactly something to be proud of. Allmark returns the lamp to Lilte. Lilte is surprised as she takes the lamp. She thanks Allmark for the day and quietly asks him to keep the handkerchief a secret. Musen informs Allmark that Wendy, Wallace, and even Torque Shife were searching too, noting Torque's odd enthusiasm for such situations. They spot Torque and his companions in the distance. Torque states they all come together when someone is in trouble. He adds that he has sent everyone else back, remarking they are not a bad class. Nelson asks if Wallace has returned yet, and Nourish wonders how far he went, while Allmark doubts he is in danger. Musen decides to wait for Wallace, feeling he should do at least this much since they worried everyone. Allmark offers to stay too, seeing it as a good chance to talk to Wallace, whom he has never spoken with before. Nelson, Musen, and Nourish depart, with Nelson wishing Allmark luck in his chat and Musen telling him to see him tomorrow. Allmark spots Wallace in the distance, standing alone. Allmark calls out to Wallace. Wallace turns and Allmark informs him that Lilte made it back safe and sound. Allmark thanks Wallace for looking for them. Wallace continues walking away without a word. Allmark is puzzled by the lack of even a reply. As Wallace walks away, he briefly turns back with a smirk and cryptically states, "The forest was crying." Allmark reacts with surprise and confusion. Wallace continues walking away, leaving Allmark looking puzzled. Allmark stands by the slammed door, processing Wallace's strange remark. Allmark reflects on past hardships, like going a whole day without food or marching for 2 days with only sips of water. He recalls nights on the road, battling hunger after running out of travel money. He thought he was used to hard times, but supposes the body tends toward laziness after all. His senses fading from hunger, he considers asking Musen to sell him some snacks, imagining Musen happily obliging. He decides he cannot waste any more time and reaches for some money, hearing a knock. He wonders if it is Musen at the door. Opening the door, he is surprised to see Wendy, who confirms it is her. Wendy explains she heard Allmark came back late with Lilte and thought he might have missed dinner. She offers him some food, saying she bought too much in town and couldn't finish it all, much to Allmark's surprise. Wendy insists that if he ate it, it would actually help her out. Allmark, though having nothing to give back immediately, accepts her offer. Wendy, feeling she is always leaning on him, tells him the star-shaped ones are really good. She wishes him luck with his meditation practice before leaving. Allmark starts eating the star-shaped sweets Wendy gave him. He thinks these kinds of sweets make him sleepy and he might stop at 3 when he hears another knock. He opens the door to find Lilte, who confirms it is her again. Lilte offers him food, thanking him for the day and saying she made him miss dinner. She echoes Wendy's sentiment that the star-shaped ones are the best, though Allmark tries to decline. Allmark, though still somewhat unsettled, feels a bit comforted by the gesture. With 2 bags of snacks, Allmark figures he will not need to get snacks for a while. He then hears that strange, echoing sound from the night forest again, which in the north is called the magic flute of the forest. Allmark recalls his father, Ray's, once said the sound was the Grim Reaper's flute. A traveling mage described it as the sound of darkness taking shape. When the forest reaches a certain level of darkness at night, this sound can be heard, signaling that strange creatures from the forest depths are emerging, their nature and motives unknown. These creatures slaughter everything in sight and vanish by morning, with stories of entire mercenary bands being wiped out by them, possessing an intense hatred for humans and strength that daunts even hardened soldiers. They are described as the embodiment of humanity's fear of darkness. Allmark himself has encountered them, and the memory of the hideous sound makes his skin crawl. Allmark reflects that his encounters with these creatures were in the northern forests, and he doesn't recall hearing the sound south of the Central Plains. He shudders, thinking he couldn't have protected Lilte unarmed if one of those monsters had appeared back then. He looks at his sword. He resolves that from now on, he will have to focus not only on meditation, but also on meticulously maintaining his sword every day. The next day, he considers telling the professors about the sound he heard yesterday. However, he hesitates, as he didn't actually see a monster and thinks he might not be able to ask for too much. On his way to school, Allmark wonders how to bring up the unsettling sound he heard. He is recognized by someone. He encounters Eld and Shiri, 2 first-year students who greet him cheerfully. They ask if he has learned any magic yet, and Allmark admits he hasn't, much to their surprise. They question how a 3rd year at the Magic Academy can't use a single spell, calling him a poor guy, while Allmark recalls meeting these 2 during a first-year meditation class. Allmark remembers that the first-year meditation class ended up being a write-off that day because, for some reason, Eld and Shiri took a liking to him and started chatting, and he hasn't been allowed back in since. Though he muses it's partly their fault, they encourage him to keep working hard, as they've just started learning mist magic. Shiri proudly demonstrates making a little smoke come out of her hand. Eld plans to practice in the forest again after class, thinking he is close to being able to cover the whole area in mist. They tell Allmark that meditation is the foundation of magic, and that he should learn from them and keep at it. Just then, Torque and another student arrive, Torque greeting Allmark and teasing him about babysitting a kid so early. Allmark tells Torque that Eld and Shiri don't really make fun of him. Torque mockingly suggests Eld and Shiri teach Allmark a few things, calling him pathetic for not being able to use a single spell, though Allmark can still hear him. After Torque and his companion leave, Eld asks if they make fun of Allmark in class too. Eld and Shiri express sympathy for Allmark being stuck in the same class as those mean-looking people, and decide to form a Help Allmark club to look out for him. Allmark smiles, appreciating their kindness as they promise to assist him if he needs anything. After class, Musen approaches Allmark by the window. Musen asks Allmark if he remembers when he told him about seeing a strange shadow on his way to school. Allmark recalls it was the day Musen overslept, and Musen agrees to put that aside for now. Musen explains he didn't tell anyone else, especially Nelson, because people would say it's his imagination or that he misread something. He wanted to tell Allmark because Allmark actually listened to him seriously. Allmark replies that he can tell if it's true by looking into Musen's eyes, and doesn't think Musen would misinterpret something like that. Musen describes the bushes rustling and seeing a black shadow, a little bigger than himself, which startled and scared him, while Allmark asks for a clear look. Musen admits it might have just been a trick of the eye. However, Allmark believes him, reasoning that his eyes saw it, and if it were just a mistake, the bushes wouldn't have moved. Something was there. Allmark asks Musen to clarify what he meant when he said he saw the shadow just for a moment out of the corner of his eye. Allmark asks how big it was, and Musen confirms he also thought it was a little bigger than himself, which Allmark notes is what he was talking about. Allmark points out that one normally can't tell the size of something you only see for a split second out of the corner of your eye. Allmark tells Musen he has a sharp eye. Musen is touched, saying no one has ever told him that before. Allmark asks if he noticed anything else, and Musen hesitantly mentions maybe claws. Musen clarifies he saw something like long claws on the shadow this time, which he doesn't think he saw last time. Allmark speculates it might be different from the one before. Allmark thanks Musen for telling him and asks if he wants him to talk to the teachers so everyone can be careful. Musen quickly declines, satisfied that Allmark listened to him. Musen thanks Allmark for listening and says goodbye, calling Allmark really something. Wendy playfully pokes Allmark, asking what is going on and if he was having a secret meeting with Musen. Allmark denies it was a secret meeting, and Wendy observes that maybe Musen doesn't have much confidence in himself. Wendy agrees Musen is really nice but seems to trail off. Allmark reflects that Musen might be so nice that he holds himself back sometimes. Later, while students are collecting herbs for class, Allmark finishes collecting herbs and suggests they head back. Suddenly, he hears someone running and wonders who it is. Allmark calls out to Shiri, asking what has her running like that. Shiri runs towards Allmark, crying his name, clearly distressed. Allmark tries to calm her, asking what happened to Eld, as Shiri sobs that Eld was taken away. Shiri frantically explains Eld was taken by a monster and pleads for Allmark's help. She adds she saw another shadow at the entrance to the forest, and Allmark confirms by a monster in broad daylight. Allmark presses Shiri for details about what kind of monster it was. He asks for its color and whether it was human-like or dog-like, stressing the need for essential information, while Shiri admits she was too scared to get a good look. Allmark encourages Shiri to pull herself together, reminding her she's a magician and promising to save Eld. Shiri, trying to compose herself, agrees to tell him what she saw. She describes the monster as brown, furry, with horns, and about the height of a middle school student. Allmark pats her head, telling her that's great information and instructs her to get a teacher while he heads into the forest first. He asks if she can go on her own, and she agrees, hurrying off. As Allmark rushes off, he calls out to Torque and his companions. Torque mockingly asks if Allmark is playing around with a first year again, remarking it suits him. Allmark urgently explains Eld was taken by a monster and asks Torque to get a teacher and look after Shiri, stating he's going into the forest first. Torque, surprised, tells him to hold on, not understanding what is happening. Allmark states there's no time to explain. Torque questions Allmark's plan to go into the forest alone after a first year was taken by a monster. Allmark declares he's going to get Eld back and, if necessary, take down that monster. Allmark pleads with Torque for help as Shiri hurries away. Torque questions Allmark's intention to take down a monster. Torque clicks his tongue in annoyance. Torque instructs his companions to go with the first year and get a teacher. One of Torque's companions looks concerned as Allmark explains the urgency and Torque's apparent agreement. Torque scoffs at Allmark's intention, stating it is a matter of course. He remarks that the idiot Allmark thinks he can do anything except magic, but doesn't know anything about this forest, before sighing and deciding to go himself. Torque, resolute, declares he has no choice but to go himself. In the forest, a large furry monster stands over an unconscious Eld as the chapter ends. Allmark, finding himself unarmed, breaks off a tree branch for defense, figuring it's better than nothing. Allmark calls out, trying to stop a rapidly retreating Torque. Torque runs through the forest, with Allmark noting his impressive speed. Torque Shife appears, questioning Allmark's presence and mentioning he had others escorting the first years. Allmark looks on with a puzzled expression. Torque then questions if Allmark expects him to handle the monster and alert a teacher, before telling Allmark not to interfere. Torque confronts Allmark, asserting he wouldn't panic or be scared, telling Allmark not to underestimate him. He explains that a kidnapped junior is precisely why he's there, adding he can't trust Allmark's limited magic or forest skills. Allmark acknowledges Torque's perspective but cautions that while noble pride is admirable, it alone won't ensure survival. Torque scoffs at what a mercenary might know of a knight's pride. Allmark concedes the point and suggests they proceed together. As they run, Allmark advises Torque to protect himself, a sentiment Torque echoes, telling Allmark to shut up. Torque questions Allmark if he even knows where to go. Torque explains that monsters wouldn't nest in shallow parts, meaning they are deeper in the woods, calling Allmark an idiot for thinking otherwise. Allmark points towards a clearing where first years practice magic, suggesting they can pick up the monster's tracks from there. Torque criticizes Allmark's thinking as naive, given the vastness of the forest, but Allmark asks if he has a better idea. Torque agrees to Allmark's plan, telling him to wait up. Allmark dashes ahead, prompting Torque to curse and comment on his surprising speed. Allmark discovers Eld's bag. He calls out to Torque, identifying the found item. Allmark remarks on Shiri's clear observation despite her fear, calling her a remarkable child. He considers Shiri's account, the footprints, and the shadow Musen saw at the forest entrance. Torque questions if Musen's story about the creature having claws can be trusted, suggesting it's one of his usual exaggerations. A younger student, likely Musen in a flashback or Allmark recalling his words, insists that Musen was serious and genuinely saw it. Despite Torque's continued skepticism about believing a coward, Allmark firmly states his belief in Musen. Torque questions the significance of the monster having claws, while Allmark explains they can identify the monster that attacked Eld by its claws, horns, and size. Allmark identifies the creature as a Jirenan, an evil forest ogre, relieved it's not a demon of darkness. He describes the Jirenan, one eye, a single horn, small but incredibly strong, known to attack and eat humans. Torque processes this new information about the Jirenan, while Allmark notes that this identification gives them a glimmer of hope. Torque asks Allmark to elaborate on what he means. Allmark explains that Jirenans take prey to their lairs alive before killing them, as they prefer fresh food, which means Eld is likely still alive. Torque remarks on Allmark's extensive knowledge of monsters. Allmark clarifies it's a matter of survival, not choice, and urges they resolve the situation before nightfall. As Allmark starts to lead, Torque shouts for him to wait. Torque angrily berates Allmark for running off alone, calling him a barbarian. Allmark, momentarily chagrined, covers his mouth and tells Torque to forget he said that. Allmark then reminds Torque to use his intellect, pointing out that a mage is right beside him. Allmark observes with astonishment, finding it hard to believe Torque can move his fingers with such delicacy. Torque initiates a beast tracking spell, his fingers moving with surprising delicacy. Torque explains the spell will color the monster's scent, and as the spell clarifies, turning yellow rapidly, it will be easier to track. Allmark agrees and they prepare to move. Allmark seems to be yawning from the exertion or the magic's effect. Musen cheerfully greets some other students. Deg and Galeen inquire about Eld, asking Musen if he was hurt. Musen explains that Eld was abducted by a monster. Deg and Galeen find this story strange, noting they haven't encountered monsters in the forest since they enrolled. Eld's abduction is briefly shown. They acknowledge Allmark and Torque went after it, with one clarifying they aren't saying it's a lie. Deg and Galeen express concern that Allmark and Torque might act recklessly against such a foe, as no matter how strong they are, it's still a monster. Deg decides they should hurry since Allmark and Torque went to save the child taken by the monster. Musen reflects that it was indeed a monster, the one he saw earlier. He is consumed by guilt, believing that if he had alerted the teachers and everyone sooner, the abduction might have been prevented. Shiri asks if they hadn't believed Musen. Musen berates himself for his lack of courage in not investigating the rustling bushes more closely, which would have allowed him to confidently confirm it was a monster. Determined, despite his fear, he declares it's his fault and that he must go into the forest. The glowing magical trail leads them deeper into the forest. The trail is clearly visible on the trees and ground. Allmark navigates the dense woods with astonishing speed and agility. Torque struggles to keep pace with Allmark through the treacherous terrain. Torque is startled as Allmark suddenly veers off. Torque loses his footing and tumbles into the undergrowth. He curses his misfortune as he falls. Torque marvels at Allmark's incredible stamina, wondering about the training that forged such strength, acutely aware that the captured first year's life is in danger if he doesn't catch up soon. He feels unable to ask Allmark to slow down, as he was the one who insisted on joining. Watching Allmark, Torque reflects that Allmark excels not only in magic, but is the real deal in everything else too. He further muses that Allmark's mind also works exceptionally well, he can do anything. Torque acknowledges that even when it comes to magic, Allmark's capabilities are impressive. Torque realizes with certainty that Allmark will eventually surpass him, even in magic. He envisions a future where he will be desperately chasing Allmark's lead in magical prowess, much like he struggles to keep up with him physically now. This realization is one he accepts without any doubt, his eyes filled with grim determination. Torque recalls the cold, disdainful stares he often endured from others. He had vowed to meet their arrogance with his own and to relentlessly pursue strength, believing he was succeeding. He felt he too should possess such power and had striven to make his capabilities undeniably clear to everyone, clenching his teeth to gain power that is clearly visible but in reality. Torque admits to feeling utterly helpless and miserable, his past efforts and perceived talents now seeming insignificant. He curses his current predicament. He admires Allmark's unwavering confidence and focus, running towards his own goals without worrying about others' eyes. He sees this innate self-assurance as another of Allmark's talents. Torque anticipates that Allmark will effortlessly pass him by without a second glance, eventually surpassing him even in magic, as if it's a given. Torque resolves to accept the humiliation of his own perceived lack of power, but a new determination flickers within him. Torque acknowledges that while he can currently match Allmark's speed, this won't always be the case. He must keep running, knowing that in magic, at least for now, he is far ahead. He is determined not to falter or ask Allmark to wait, remembering an oath he swore that day. He mentally invokes the name of Shife, steeling his resolve. Allmark spots their quarry in the distance. He notes with admiration that Torque's tracking magic has held despite the long run. Allmark acknowledges Torque's amazing effort. Allmark is surprised by Torque's arrival. As an exhausted Torque catches up, Allmark inquires if the first-year kid is still safe. Torque, still panting heavily, reassures him that he thinks the kid will be fine since they've made it this far, remarking that it was close. Allmark then declares that from here on, the rest is his responsibility and tells Torque to leave it to him, surging forward. Musen reaches the forest entrance but hesitates, feeling a sense of dread. He is visibly distressed and glances around nervously. The familiar path now seems terrifying to him. He knows Allmark and Torque are chasing monsters and feels he needs to go too. He feels compelled to help Allmark and Torque in some way, but is paralyzed by fear. Suddenly Fia appears, calling his name and asking why he looks so pale. Startled, Musen frantically explains to Fia that it's serious, that monsters have appeared in the forest. Fia remarks this isn't like him. Fia expresses surprise at the news of monsters, acknowledging its seriousness as it's never happened before. Musen elaborates that a first-year student was kidnapped, and Allmark and Torque went to save them, while Deg and others sought a teacher. He blames himself for not properly reporting the monster shadow he saw the other day to the teacher. Fia consoles him, telling him it's not his fault, and reveals she too saw something like a shadow between the dorm and the school building. Fia reflects that she shouldn't have dismissed what she saw as a mistake. Fia places a reassuring hand on Musen's shoulder, telling him not to worry and that she will go, advising him to return to the school building. Fia asks if he is sure about her going alone, and Musen confirms. Musen confesses he came this far but is too scared to proceed alone and lacks the courage, agreeing that returning is the right call. Fia tells Musen that attempting to chase the monsters with his current strength would be reckless, not courageous, and he would only become a hindrance. Musen quietly agrees, admitting she is right. He acknowledges his helplessness, wondering what he was planning to do in the forest anyway, and accepts there was nothing he could have done to help. Fia advises him not to stress over it, as everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. She assures him it's fine and to leave it to her, before heading into the forest herself. The massive one-eyed Jirenan strides through the forest, carrying Eld. The monster crushes obstacles underfoot. The reflection in the monster's eye shows Allmark preparing to defend himself. The Jirenan suddenly hurls Allmark through the air. The monster turns its intense gaze upon the fallen Allmark. Allmark crashes hard onto the ground. Allmark faces the imposing Jirenan, which stares intently at him while Eld lies nearby. After a slight slip, Allmark regains his footing. From a distance, Torque curses, wondering about Allmark's resilience. Allmark resolves to continue distracting the Jirenan. He courageously dashes towards the beast to keep its attention away from Eld, while Torque looks on in surprise. Allmark skillfully dodges a powerful blow from the Jirenan. Torque watches with apprehension, hesitating. Allmark evades another swipe from the monster. The Jirenan growls, acknowledging the impact of Allmark's attacks, which are far more powerful than practiced thrusts. A piece of the Jirenan's horn or tusk chips off and drips, showing the force of Allmark's blow. Allmark strikes the Jirenan's head with his makeshift club. He observes that his wooden weapon is lighter and shorter than his sword. Otherwise, the beast's head might already be severed. The Jirenan roars furiously, proving surprisingly resilient to Allmark's physical attacks. Allmark continues to fight valiantly with his club. The monster is hit again but remains standing. A powerful blow from the Jirenan sends debris flying. Torque reaches Eld, checking if he's injured and urging him to move further away from the fight. As Allmark is pushed back by the monster, the distance between them and Eld widens. Torque, observing Allmark's struggle, initially thinks Allmark can handle the monster alone given its current state. Torque's expression quickly turns to shock at a new development. Suddenly, a second Jirenan appears in the forest, unnoticed by Allmark, who is focused on the first. Torque realizes with horror that Allmark hasn't noticed the new threat and is about to be surrounded. Overwhelmed by the dire situation, Torque grits his teeth, cursing his decision to come and exclaiming that he shouldn't have come. The second Jirenan lunges towards an unsuspecting Allmark from behind. Torque, clutching Eld, desperately shouts a warning, "Allmark, behind you!" The perilous confrontation hangs in the balance as the chapter concludes. Torque Shifei's urgent warning about an attack from behind reaches Allmark. Allmark now faces two growling Jirenan monsters in the dim forest, one letting out a guttural growl. Torque watched as Allmark, with astonishing speed, dodged the strike from behind. Allmark then landed two powerful blows to the Jirenan's face, a feat Torque found unbelievable. Impressed, Torque acknowledged that Allmark was truly remarkable as he prepared to cast a spell, his fingers igniting with magical energy. Torque unleashed his flame finger magic. He knew it was a crude spell and worried Allmark might get caught in the blast. Despite the risk, Torque reasoned that anyone unable to evade such an attack would deserve it, as flames erupted towards the monsters. The Jirenan was struck by multiple blasts of fire, letting out a pained growl. Allmark observed the effects of the fire magic. Torque, having let his control slip slightly, rationalized his actions. Allmark noted the 3 shots from Torque's spell. The 2 injured Jirenans reeled from the attack, which Torque believed would be effective. Torque mused that for such inferior creatures, fire was the appropriate method of engagement as one of them groaned. Seizing the moment while one Jirenan was stunned, Allmark lunged forward. He thrust his makeshift wooden club towards the creature. The weapon connected directly with the Jirenan's massive eye. The monster recoiled in agony from the brutal attack, and even Torque, holding Eld, winced. The Jirenan Allmark had struck collapsed, its eye destroyed. Torque watched with grim focus. Allmark landed heavily on the back of the fallen Jirenan. He then questioned if the first Jirenan was truly dead. Allmark observed that one monster remained and the fire from Torque's spell had died out. He noted his branch was now broken and useless, as the remaining Jirenan grunted. Torque realized he needed to provide magical support again for Allmark. The remaining Jirenan cried out in surprise or pain. Torque was shocked by Allmark's next move. He wondered when Allmark had picked up a nut, which now lay on the ground as a distraction for the grunting monster. Allmark used the distraction to approach the Jirenan. Allmark grabbed onto the Jirenan's leg as it turned, surprised. The Jirenan thrashed, trying to dislodge Allmark. The Jirenan was momentarily confused by Allmark clinging to its leg. Allmark then used the monster's leg as a springboard, launching himself upwards onto its back as it staggered. He maintained his grip on the creature's fur. The Jirenan's large clawed hand reached out, trying to grab him. The Jirenan groaned in pain as Allmark, bloodied, held on. Allmark relentlessly pushed the monster's horn deeper into its own head. With a sickening snap, the horn pierced through, and the monster finally fell defeated. A bloodied and exhausted Allmark stood over the defeated Jirenan. His determined eyes surveyed the aftermath of the battle. Looking at the fallen monsters, Allmark quietly thanked Torque for his assistance. Allmark walked towards Torque, admitting that he would have been in trouble without Torque's voice and magic. Torque listened to Allmark's acknowledgement. Torque, holding the unconscious Eld, replied that he had said he would handle it, but conceded it had been tough. Allmark, seeing Eld, stated that the first year was fine, to which Torque expressed relief. Allmark pointed out that Torque had called him by his name for the first time, which surprised Torque. Allmark admitted that he was happy about it. Torque internally admitted he had indeed called Allmark by name spontaneously, though he had hesitated, considering it an acknowledgement of Allmark as part of the class. He considered this a matter of petty pride. Torque wondered if Allmark had been thinking about that during their intense battle. Torque mused that Allmark was really in a league of his own. He thought Allmark was the same kind of person as Wallace, and admitted he was sure he'd thought Allmark's name was something different. Allmark, slightly confused, confirmed that Allmark was indeed his name. Torque reacted with surprise to Allmark's confirmation. Hearing this, Torque burst into laughter, amused by the situation. Allmark looked on, slightly puzzled by Torque's reaction. Allmark smiled faintly as Torque continued to laugh. Torque asked if Eld had any injuries, and Allmark confirmed there didn't seem to be any external wounds. Torque called out to Eld, asking if he could hear him. Allmark urgently tried to rouse Eld, questioning why he wasn't waking up. Torque speculated that Eld should just be unconscious, and that the monster likely didn't carry any poison. When Torque asked again why Eld wasn't waking up, Allmark admitted he didn't know. Suddenly, a figure approached Allmark and Torque. It was Professor Ilmes, who called out to Allmark and Torque. Allmark and Torque looked up in surprise at the professor's arrival. Professor Ilmes asked if they were all right and had any injuries, noting Allmark was covered in blood. Torque quickly explained to Professor Ilmes that the blood was from the monster's backlash and assured him they were fine, with Allmark echoing the sentiment. Allmark informed Professor Ilmes that Eld still hadn't woken up, to which the professor reacted with a question. Professor Ilmes examined Eld using a gentle magical light. The professor determined that Eld was fine and had just exhausted his magic. Torque questioned this, referring to Eld's magic, as Allmark mentioned the girl who rushed in with Deg. Professor Ilmes recalled hearing from Shiri about Eld's actions. The professor recounted that when the monsters suddenly appeared, Eld had protected Shiri and surrounded the area with mist. Professor Ilmes relayed that Shiri said Eld told her to run away quickly. The professor admitted to Torque that he had initially thought Eld was just putting on his usual tough act, believing he could soon cover the whole area with mist. Torque acknowledged that Eld risked his life to protect Shiri, recognizing him as one of those geniuses recognized for his talent. Torque agreed with the professor, stating that Eld's actions were not something anyone could do, calling him something else entirely. Allmark considered that he had a plan to win using Musen's foresight, his combat skills, knowledge of monsters, and perhaps claws, but wondered if he would have made the same choice as Eld. Allmark reflected on whether he could have made the best choice to save a classmate regardless of his own life. Torque remarked to Allmark that Eld talked as if he were taking care of Torque. Torque teased Allmark, asking if he wasn't lucky to be taken care of by such a fine first year. Allmark agreed, saying it looked like he still had a lot to learn from Eld. Torque then playfully suggested Allmark let Eld take care of him a little longer, to which Allmark conceded he better do that. Professor Ilmes, examining the defeated Jirenan, asked if Allmark and Torque had handled this themselves. Torque modestly stated to the professor that most of it was Allmark's doing. Allmark, however, claimed he didn't do much. Allmark then asserted that Torque's statement wasn't true, explaining to the professor that they wouldn't have made it this far if it weren't for Torque, who also helped with magic during the battle. The professor mused that they both played their roles. Professor Ilmes admitted he hadn't expected two monsters to appear and questioned if monsters sometimes appeared in this forest. Torque confirmed they did occasionally, but this was unusual. Professor Ilmes noted that this year seemed a little different, finding it unbelievable that monsters came down to such shallow areas, and mentioned an upcoming investigation deep into the forest. Torque eagerly volunteered to participate in the investigation to eliminate dangerous monster nests. Professor Ilmes stated that the investigation team would primarily consist of teachers and high school students, deeming it too early for elementary students like Torque, who reluctantly accepted. Just then Fia arrived, calling out to Allmark and Torque, expressing her worry and asking if they were both okay and if they had any injuries. Allmark, gesturing to Fia, reassured her that the blood on him was from the monster. Fia, relieved, said that everyone else was worried too and suggested they head back now. Allmark took a drink offered by Fia. Fia then gave Allmark a cloth, telling him to dry the blood. Allmark looked surprised by Torque's firm stance. As they prepared to leave, Torque instructed Allmark to walk behind him, which Allmark questioned. Torque explained to Fia and Allmark that Allmark had been running ahead of him the whole time. Allmark looked puzzled by Torque's earlier demand. Torque then walked ahead with Allmark following. Torque, with a slight huff, relented and told Allmark he could walk ahead if he wished. Fia watched them, reflecting that she didn't think Musen had actually seen the shadow and couldn't believe she had missed something so crucial. She resolved to be more careful in the future and not to do anything useless. Fia considered the increasing number of monsters, wondering if they had truly started to move, referring to it as the whirlpool of death. She sensed a storm blowing from the north. Fia wondered if this ominous development would reach Nork Academy or perhaps someone else. Her thoughts turned to Allmark as she gazed into the distance. Torque, slightly annoyed, walked with Allmark. They were met by Nelson, who called out to Torque, followed by Wendy, Burherb, and Musen calling out to both of them. Nelson expressed relief that they were okay and asked what was up, to which Torque simply replied it was nothing. Nelson was impressed by Torque's nonchalant response, remarking on how cool Torque was, a sentiment echoed by another student. Torque reacted with a slight grunt to their enthusiasm. The students ran after them, with Nelson thanking Torque for his help and praising him as awesome. Wendy noticed blood on Allmark's face and expressed concern that he was hurt, though Allmark indicated it was nothing. Allmark clarified to Wendy that it wasn't his blood, which relieved her. Wendy admitted she was surprised. Suddenly, Musen tearfully apologized to Allmark. Allmark, surprised, asked what was wrong as Musen exclaimed it was his fault. Musen lamented that if only he had told the teacher about the shadow he saw. Allmark, however, told Musen that he was saved because of him. Allmark then asked Musen if he had seen claws, to Musen's confusion. Allmark explained that when he heard Shiri's story, it immediately clicked for him that it must be a Jirenan, based on the description of claws, messy fur, and horns. He told Musen that just knowing what they were up against allowed him to plan their strategy in advance, and that Musen had really helped him. Musen asked if his story was helpful, and Allmark affirmed it was, of course. Musen, looking downcast, told Allmark not to blame himself, then confessed that he had heard Allmark and Torque went into the forest and thought he'd follow, but couldn't summon the courage. He admitted that in the end, he just wandered around. Fia interjected that chasing after them with his power would have been reckless, not brave, and he would have been more of a burden anyway. Allmark agreed with Fia, stating that was true. Allmark told Musen it would have been even more helpful if he had come. Musen looked up, surprised by Allmark's words. Allmark admitted it was embarrassing, but he had thought he could manage on his own. He confessed that if it wasn't for Torque, they wouldn't have found the Jirenan, that was why. Allmark added that if Musen had been there, he would have felt a lot more confident. Musen, touched, muttered that Allmark was crediting someone like him, but Allmark insisted it was Musen's ability to see what needed to be seen that had helped him. Allmark told Musen that if something happened again, he would count on him. Wendy then declared she would help too, wanting to assist Allmark, who thanked her. Allmark added that if Wendy had come too, he would have felt so much stronger, and encouraged her to make sure to call on him. Allmark then also included Musen, who affirmed his willingness. Wendy, embracing Musen, said she was counting on him, and Musen agreed if someone like him could be of help. Fia then asked, by the way, if they had met Wallace in the forest, as he had chased after them. The group was surprised to hear Wallace had chased them, with Allmark confirming they hadn't met him. Fia found this troubling, wondering if Wallace was still in the forest, and musing that if it were her, she'd be there by now. Just then Wallace appeared, calling out his own name with some exasperation. Wallace explained to the group that he had heard Musen's story and decided to chase after them, but the forest was vast, so it seemed he couldn't catch up. Wallace expressed relief that the first years looked safe, placing a hand on Allmark's shoulder. He then thanked Fia. Fia, however, told Wallace he should go and thank Allmark, admitting that while she had said pompous things to Musen, she couldn't do anything herself, and suggested Wallace join them on the way back. Wallace departed and the group watched him go. Wendy asked Allmark what was wrong, but he initially said it was nothing. He then admitted to Wendy that Wallace's claim of not being able to catch up was a lie, as he had smelled blood on Wallace. Fia, overhearing, was shocked and wondered aloud why Wallace would lie, before abruptly dashing off. Allmark watched Fia pursue Wallace, a question hanging in the air. Musen, enlightened, declared to Allmark that he would share all rumors he heard with everyone from now on. Musen asked Allmark about rumors, and Allmark confirmed their importance, stating that one never knew when a rumor might be useful to someone. Wendy thought this was a good idea and enthusiastically encouraged Musen to keep telling them more rumors. Musen, excited, suggested they head back to the dorm. He added that he was hungry after all the running, and Wendy chimed in that she was starving from worrying so much, though Musen playfully questioned if she was telling the truth. The day begins with Allmark stretching after ringing a bell. He is greeted by Wendy, who asks if he is heading to the forest. Wendy explains that she is going to gather herbs since it has been a while since students were allowed to enter the forest, and she invites Allmark to join her. Allmark declines Wendy's invitation, stating he has herbs, and she mentions having meditation training with Professor Ilmes. He wishes her luck. Allmark then recalls a recent incident where a first-year student was abducted by a Jirenan monster in the forest. Consequently, elementary division students, including Allmark, were forbidden from entering, and herbs for healing arts classes had to be sourced from Ms. Syria's garden. Fia informs Allmark and Torque that the forest restriction has been lifted, though they are cautioned against venturing too deep, a directive from the instructors. The first-year student, Eld, who was abducted, had collapsed from magical exhaustion and returned to class with minor trauma, remembering little of the incident. While Allmark and Torque became known for rescuing Eld, their reserved demeanor about the event caused the initial buzz among students expecting tales of heroism to fade, especially for Allmark. Allmark felt that defeating the Jirenan was more difficult than expected and not something to boast about. Torque, on his part, was reluctant to admit he had collaborated with Allmark during the fight. As the forest restriction was lifted, talk of the incident naturally died down. Later, Musen brings up Lord Borak, whose statue is in the garden, asking Allmark if they had studied him, though Allmark seems unsure. Musen explains that the garden has many statues, but Lord Borux is hidden within a maze of hedges. The garden itself is meticulously maintained, featuring intricate paths. At the maze's end stands a statue resembling a scholar or magician. Allmark suddenly recalls that this part of the garden is a remnant of a lord's manor. He further remembers that the island, now ruled by King Galil, was donated by Lord Valak. Musen teases Allmark for remembering, and Allmark apologizes for the delay in his recollection. Musen leans in to share a secret with Allmark about the statue of Lord Valak. He tells him it is said to talk when night comes. Allmark's calm, almost indifferent reaction disappoints Musen, who expected a more frightened response. Musen exclaims that Allmark should be more shocked and scared by such a rumor. His loud exclamation attracts the attention of Wendy, Nelson, and Lilte. Annoyed by Allmark's lack of fear, Musen decides to tell everyone the story, declaring Allmark no fun. Allmark then calmly begins to paint a spooky picture for them, describing a pitch-dark, deserted garden at midnight where one might hear a mysterious voice. The voice seems to emanate from deep within its maze. Allmark continues his tale, describing the chilling discovery. After navigating the maze towards the voice, one finds only the silent statue of Lord Valak. Nelson finds the story interesting, while Lilte admits she would have been scared. Musen, impressed by Allmark's vivid description, asks if he experienced it himself. Allmark clarifies that he heard the story from a student in Class 1, surprising Musen, who thought it was Allmark's own tale. Intrigued by Allmark's story, Nelson proposes they investigate Lord Valak's statue that night. Musen strongly refuses, unwilling to visit a scary place. When Nelson asks the others, Wendy and Lilte also decline. Disappointed, particularly with Allmark, who wants to focus on training, Nelson prepares to go alone. Nelson declares he will go alone to find the source of the voice, much to Musen's surprise. Nelson reassures Musen that the garden is patrolled and not dangerous. Allmark advises Nelson to be careful, though Nelson tries to persuade Allmark to join. Wendy expresses her anticipation to hear about the voice. Just then Wallace arrives, and Nelson eagerly invites him to join their expedition. Musen begins recounting the spooky tale to Wallace, with Allmark listening nearby. Wallace finds Musen's story interesting. Despite Nelson's enthusiastic invitation to join them that night, Wallace declines. Wallace explains that he believes there might not be much to gain from getting involved. He advises Nelson to be careful if he proceeds with his plan, to which Nelson agrees. The next morning, a tired-looking Nelson arrives. Allmark notices his pale appearance and asks if he is okay. Nelson recounts his visit to the garden the previous night, confirming that it was just as Musen had described. He explains that he heard a voice deep within the maze, but upon investigating found only Lord Valak's statue, leaving him unable to sleep. Allmark assumes Nelson must have been terrified. Nelson clarifies he wasn't scared, just very curious about the strange voice he definitely heard when no one was there. He admits he couldn't sleep due to this curiosity. Hearing Nelson's account from Allmark, Wendy remarks on the strangeness of the story. Allmark, now intrigued himself, considers investigating that night. Wendy reminds him of his earlier warning to Nelson. Allmark reasons that Nelson also hearing the voice changes things, making it more than just a rumor. Wendy muses that in dangerous situations, she would feel safer with someone strong in martial arts. Allmark reflects that against ghosts, magic might be more useful, though he feels hopeless in that regard. Wendy, however, expresses her belief that Allmark will become an amazing magician, though Allmark considers this a future prospect. Wendy then smiles, commenting that girls with strong wills seem to excel at magic. That night, Allmark, Wendy, and Nelson set out to investigate. Nelson mentions that Musen remained resolute in not coming and Lilte had already left. As they walk, Nelson and Wendy practice holding light orbs, questioning if this allows them to use both hands. They note the cool night breeze and that they departed right after dinner, around the same time Nelson went the previous night. As they proceed by a lantern, Nelson remarks on the brightness and lack of a ghostly atmosphere. Wendy observes that strong light creates darker shadows. Nelson suggests Wendy walk between him and Allmark for safety. Allmark points towards Lord Valak's maze. Wendy praises Nelson for his courage in coming alone the night before, which surprises Allmark. Allmark then mutters that he isn't scared either. Allmark internally berates himself for his earlier boast. Upon reaching the maze entrance, Allmark notes the absence of any sound. Nelson, however, excitedly insists he heard the voice there the previous day. As they debate waiting or entering, they spot a lamplight approaching. Wendy and Nelson quickly hide in the bushes, urging Allmark to join them. Allmark questions why they are hiding as Wendy signals for silence. A guard passes by with a lantern. After the guard is gone, Nelson expresses relief. Fia then appears, reminding them of the warnings they received. She outlines the chain of scoldings they would face if caught by various authorities. Nelson recounts a past incident where he and Riito were caught by a guard named Jirenan, who kindly let them off with a warning. Allmark mentions he also knows Jide. Wendy adds that Jirenan is understanding. Allmark confirms Jide's kindness, recalling how Jide helped him when he first arrived at the academy. Allmark remembers he hasn't seen Jide since the first day of classes. He considers greeting him next time. Suddenly, a flicker of sound catches Nelson's attention. He gets an intense look and Wendy is startled. Nelson declares that the voice is coming from inside the maze, just like the previous night. Wendy turns to Allmark, asking if he saw something. Allmark questions if the sound is the wind, to which Nelson replies it wasn't there moments ago. Deciding to investigate, Nelson leads them forward. As they venture deeper, Wendy notes the darkness. Allmark and Nelson confirm they can hear the voice. Wendy, struggling to hear it clearly, likens herself to an old grandma with bad hearing, while Nelson, frustrated at almost pinpointing it, directs them to turn left. Allmark is amazed by Nelson's ability to navigate the maze, which Nelson attributes to playing hide-and-seek there daily during his first year. Wendy expertly controls her light orb, maintaining its perfect shape despite the surroundings, a technique Allmark finds incredible. However, Allmark is more bothered by a faint wind he has felt since entering the maze. As they near their goal, Nelson gives another direction, and Allmark contemplates the maze's layout. Allmark notes the voice is getting closer, though frustratingly just out of clear hearing range. Following Nelson's direction, they emerge into the plaza where Lord Volok's statue stands. Suddenly, Wendy exclaims she hears a voice. Nelson confirms it's like yesterday, but the voice is fading. He finds no one around and wonders if whatever made the sound ran off. Allmark, however, deduces that the voice is the wind and questions if it's hiding. The faint wind they had been sensing spreads out and vanishes in the plaza. Allmark instructs Wendy and Nelson to gather the wind. He urges them to summon it back. Nelson is surprised by the concept of a wind-bending technique. Wendy, though hesitant about a technique she just learned and concerned about her light fading, begins to attempt it. Wendy and Nelson focus their efforts on manipulating the wind. Wendy announces she can hear the voice. She directs Nelson to continue blowing the wind her way. Allmark plans to assist by blowing from the opposite direction to concentrate the voice. He exclaims that it's much clearer now. Allmark then recalls Lilte mentioning earlier that she was hungry and wanted to return to the dorm. Suddenly, Nourish appears, surprising Allmark.